eyes on me as I picked up the knife and, willing my hand not to shake, made the first cut, a strong, neat incision down the abdomen, deep enough that the skin and muscle could be retracted to expose the peritoneal membrane. I sliced through the tough, fibrous tissue and fumbled around with sweating, shaky hands for the retractors on the tray next to me. I paused as McVeigh took up his place opposite me. His demeanour was sullen, and though he smirked as he caught my gaze, even that didn't reach his eyes. I placed the two flat blades of the cold metal instrument against the sides of the incision and cleared my throat awkwardly. "Mr. McVeigh, could you please pull on the retractors?" He gave a mumbled, "Aye," and took hold of the handles, taking especial care for his clammy hands to linger over mine. Shuddering, I turned my attention to the contents of the abdomen. I described to Professor Williamson what I saw, starting with the liver, the enlarged organ the colour of burnt sienna, courtesy of a decade of cirrhosis. After I had described everything immediately visible, I reached into the cavity to scoop out the intestines. The soft, ropey viscera were wickedly slippery. I bit my lip to stop myself from swearing. Everyone knew that O'Neill had cursed up a blue storm in one of the men's lectures the previous week and received nothing but laughter and scattered applause in response. But I had little doubt that one oath would be all it took for the professor to ban me from his operating rooms. "Try both hands, Miss Gilchrist. They're rather on the small side, after all. Handy for sewing, perhaps, but not much use for surgery." Bastard. I heard him chuckle, and plunged both my hands into the cavity with renewed vigour. My fingers slithered, trying to find purchase on the slick twists of flesh, until finally they closed around my prize. I ran the guts through my fingers like strands of pearls, feeling for any abnormalities. Sure enough, the intestines were studded with small pouches, and I ran my thumb over one, feeling the soft protrusions give beneath my fingertip. "There's considerable evidence of diverticula," I told him, fascinated by the yards of slimy grey tube. "But there's no sign of inflammation. Would you like me to continue?" My pulse was racing again, but my earlier anxiety was forgotten. This, I thought, up to my elbows in human viscera, was what I had abandoned my mother's plans of marriage, motherhood, and good social standing for. Not that, in the end, I had been given a great deal of choice. Professor Williamson waved me away. No, you've proven that you're perfectly adequate. It's time to close up the poor the poor gentleman. Miss Latimer, if you will." Dismissed, I looked around for my abandoned gloves. They were gone, but Edith Mingy's pockets were bulging suspiciously, and she smirked at me as I resumed my seat. My glow of triumph dimmed as Julia swept past me, clearly furious to be left with the easy task. I ignored her, mentally calculating how much of my saved allowance I would have to dip into in order to replace my gloves without Aunt Emily noticing. I took my place in the cramped row of seats next to one of the stone-faced chaperones, an elderly former teacher at a local school who appeared unfazed by the mass of human innards on the table in front of her. It wasn't even a real lecture theatre, I thought bitterly, merely one of the smaller rooms normally given over to the faculty for their private use. Our number meant we were all too frequently shuffled out of sight if the proper lecture halls were required by the real medical students, in other words, the gentlemen. While the first-year students numbered well over 100, only a dozen of us were female. A dozen too many, if our critics were to be believed. If you asked the man on the proverbial street what a female medical student looked like, he would probably describe a greying spinster with her whiskery, bespectacled face buried in a textbook, that being the closest thing to the male anatomy she was likely to get, and the kind of dried, desiccated look about her that could have been brought on only by a bout of intensive education. The truth was, not one of us was over 30, and there wasn't a wart or a moustache between us. If you had seen us taking tea, you would have assumed we were serious-minded but perfectly normal young ladies. New women, perhaps, of the kind that had sprung up in the past decade, who fancied themselves equal to men in terms of intellect, but nothing that a good dose